We need a low insulin level, an elevated glucagon level, and at least sufficient carnitine, and then we have the formula for ketones. Now, this is a pretty academic way of looking at it. Me saying low insulin, increased glucagon, and perhaps the more practical side is to simply add in the relevant macronutrients. And I submit, when we're eating a real diet, and nevertheless appreciating the relevance of carbohydrates and keeping them controlled, it ends up being a mix-up with something like this, where we have protein combined with fat, combined with carnitine, providing the recipe for ketogenesis. And you might look at this and say, well, where could we get such a magical food that contains this wonderful mix of stuff? Well, it's not very hard to find it. Red meat is the perfect source of these three components of ketogenesis. Now, I appreciate, as I have been offering this version of a low-carb diet that is not eschewing protein to the degree that some people do, I appreciate that I may be inadvertently upsetting people. And so here's my diplomatic conclusion here. There are multiple ways, of course, to adhere to a low-carb diet. I kind of have two versions of that presented here. On the left, it's a version that is somewhat more appreciative of protein. On the right, it's a version that is wary of protein. But what do they have in common? They both are controlling carbohydrates. And that really is the common strength between these two. And that's the foundation that they share. And then what might be relevant in determining which of these two versions of the low-carb diet is best, I submit perhaps it's helpful to consider the underlying glycemic status of the individual. In other words, if someone is starting from this metabolically unhealthy state of hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia, in other words, prediabetes up to type 2 diabetes, most of the adults in the civilized world, or not even industrialized, we have this very common. There may be justification to be a little wary of protein at first. Perhaps, depending on what the person would prefer to eat. Nevertheless, I submit the unifying sort of version of these two, or hypothesis, or union of these two versions of the low-carb diet could be that the person is starting in this version on the right, where it is relatively low in protein, and then they're progressing as the insulin and glycemia is improving towards this state that is still controlling carbohydrates, yet acknowledging the relevance of protein. Now, then, what might this look like? Because I'm not your physician, I'm going to give you some advice. And I have no fear of litigation.
Just don't tweet it.
Because this is purely academic. Here's my advice. Here's one way you might do this. And this is my sort of cheeky attempt at making it memorable. And of course, I'm using alliteration quite heavily. So firstly, I submit to maintain a low insulin to glucagon ratio, a person, one, must control carbohydrates. Two, a person then, I submit, would be well served by then prioritizing protein, ensuring sufficient protein intake to maintain lean body mass and healthy function. And then third, all the remaining calories are filled with fat. And so let's talk about each of these with just a moment in more detail, very briefly. By controlling carbohydrates, I do mean this very widely accepted range of around 50 grams or so per day. And this depends, of course, on the person. And that would have to be optimized a little lower or a little higher, whether the person can fudge it up a little bit. But nevertheless, whatever range they come to have a healthy range for that person, they do need to scrutinize the quality of the carbohydrate. And this is no surprise, of course. I exclusively define a carbohydrate as good or bad based on the degree to which it's going to spike insulin. And so this would be just some very simplistic version of that. Next one, prioritize protein. By this, I mean that when a person is ensuring sufficiently controlled carbohydrate consumption, there is then, I submit, a benefit to ensuring the person's getting that range of protein, 1 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight. And please, throughout this talk, I've had references in corners. If I ever feared there was something deeply controversial, please look into this and make your own conclusions, just like I've done by just pursuing data and coming to a conclusion. But I submit to you, to maintain healthy lean body mass, we need to make sure we're getting in that range. And I think our love of fat sometimes prevents us from getting that. And that's why I wanted to mention this. Now, mind you, As I just turned 40 very recently, I'm mindful of my getting older, and my kids are getting older. Our need for dietary protein goes up as we age. So as we're getting older, we need to make sure we're on the higher end. Dr. Stuart Phillips has found that, and he's really one of the legends in this area, that the older we get, the less capable our body is at converting ingested protein into muscle protein. So we do indeed need a little more. And I worry that we're sometimes not getting it. And then third, as I mentioned, we fill all the remaining calories, whether that's 1,500 or 2,000 calories, that is fat. All of our remaining caloric needs come from fat. And once again, we know this very well, and Nina spoke about this very well yesterday, we need to scrutinize the quality. And in essence, I basically say, we just stick with the fats we've been eating as a species since time immemorial. It was either eat it from the animal or make a lever big enough to compress the fruit and get the oil from the fruit. It was simple, we've been doing it. So animal and fruit fats, I submit, are better than any industrial seed oils, as we all know. And so in sum, I submit that this overly simplistic paradigm of 3 steps of a healthy diet, it is, I consider healthy because it maintains what I consider a smart, metabolically prudent insulin to glucagon ratio, keeping it low, keeping it in control, allowing the benefits of the fasted state, yet without the need for caloric restriction. And then it also ensures that we are properly nourishing the body. We're giving the body what it needs by making sure that there's some focus on protein, or to maintain the alliteration, a priority on protein. With that, I thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions during the Q&A. Thank you.